day, fellow listeners. In today's lecture, we're going to discuss the origin of gods. And if oh, look, you can't bring that back in here. I've told you that. What would happen if somebody saw it? All right, okay, let's go. God damn it. Okay, well, I don't. Old machines are so these big. Okay, well, it's still recording, so I'll just tell them to edit it. We're going to speak about the origin of gods. So, when we look at history and we look at civilization, we see that gods always appears and stays with the tribe. Now, it will form itself in different manners, but most of the time it forms itself in forms of feelings or description of that which you cannot control. That is to say, your instincts, which you have to oblige by, whatever you act upon them or not. For example, love, lust, anger. You will have them, regardless if you will act upon them. Now, this is, of course, a bit of a difference between if you're a literal culture or if you're an oral culture, in that which you were born into a society which praises the written word or the spoken words. Like, for example, if you are born into a oral culture, you will think that your thoughts is as deemable as your actions. But the question arises, why is it that people from all over the world seems to have at least some sort of divine explanation for things? Where do they come from? And the way to answer this is by looking to the answer when people start to question their divine history, so to speak. Now, a modern example of this is probably the comparison of when you realize as a kid about the stories that your parents tells you in order to keep you in line or to make you happy. For example, the tale of Saint Nicolaus or Santa Claus, or if you go really long back, the Scandinavian tale of Julnir or Jul. And it basically tells the story about a bearded man who comes with gifts, who brings gifts. And when you get a little older, you realize that the idea of this man, the bearded man that comes with present, isn't real. Not as real as far as you're concerned about something that is objectively touchable, physical. But one could say that the sensation of the person is real, at least. But this confrontation caused a dramatic uproot in the life, because when you question it, it's like when people who are committed in monogamous relationship are confronted with cheating. That is to say that one has promised to do something completely and sworn to death by it, yet they do the opposite. And by doing so, you have entrusted them with a mapping in your mind that this kind of person is a certain way. And when it comes to light that the person is the total opposite, your brains take a step back and your mind says, wait a minute, if I am wrong about this mapping, what else maps have I been wrong about? So you're frozen, because you don't know if you're supposed to move forward or backwards, which causes anxiety. And with this traumatic experience, you start questioning everything else. For example, the Bible. And you become mad because you say it can be interpreted in all sorts of ways. So there's no way of telling which is the right one, and even if it is a right one. But you see, that is like saying that all arts can be interpreted in every way. Especially when it comes to the late 20th century's arts. People would put pancake in the eye socket of a skull and call it skull with pancake. They would praise it. They would say, oh, such meaning this bears. It can mean literally anything. But you see, art really just communicate that which you cannot explain yourself within you. And what the artists at that time couldn't explain by themselves was that they were making shitty art because they couldn't take feedback. If somebody said, well, that's bad art, they said, well, art could be interpreted in any ways possible. My art can't be bad. So they never corrected themselves. They never sought out to achieve the best way to describe which that they cannot describe. Which reminds me of a tale from that time where somebody had forgotten their glasses on the floor and people thought it was art. So you start questioning the Bible and you hear others speak about it in a bad way. So you buy into it, thinking, how could people in the past be so brainwashed that they can't see past their perspective through their religious belief? But you see, your friend's perspective clouds your judgment, just like how you judge the religious people. And when you follow this path, you start going down the path of science and biology. Here, you're presented with an image that tells you about neurons and receptors and hormones and little things that makes your body tick, the gear of the machine. And so you say, oh, life is just electricity. There's nothing else to it. And then you start reading about how different substance and chemicals can disrupt these pathways and how the energy travels from one place to another. Alcohol, for example, disrupts the gamma receptors. Vision, for example, becomes impaired. So you say, oh, well, that just make it more obvious. There's no way that there's something other than that which can't be explained. But then you realize there are different kinds of drugs, and you find out about a certain type that is called psychedelic. Now, there was an author just before the 20th century that spoke about psychedelics in a beautiful, poetic way. He said that you don't go looking for psychedelics. Psychedelics finds you when it thinks you are ready. And when you read this, you don't even have to experience it. It flips your perspective on reality, causes it to go topsy-turvy, haywire, surreal. But even here you are fooled, because a lot of people who partake in these kinds of substances, they'll end up in a plane of existence which they will define as out-of-body experience. But you should be vigilant here, because when you follow that path, that is when you end up with late authors such as Deepak Chopra and people who partake in crystals. For you see, it is exactly the opposite about what you are doing. You're not going outside of your body. Just like how a metaphor is not literal, so is not the explanation of the feeling that you are partaking in when you have something that you call out-of-body experience. It may feel as though you're leaving your body. What you are really feeling is the leaving of reality, because you are traveling inwards, not outwards. You know, when they discovered tribes people in Peru in the 19th century, they gave them microscopes, and they thought they will be awe of seeing this and hearing the explanation of the world, because the arrogance of the modern man was that he knew more than these tribesmen. But the tribesmen weren't amazed. They said, we already knew that. And before they could explain more, the tribesmen explained each and every single scientific amazement they were ready to explain to them, like bacteria or atoms, electrons, neurons. For they had been taking parts that which the 20th century and the 19th century man had forgotten. They had taken part in the psychedelic experience from which humans as a species have been taking part of far longer than we can imagine. Because you see, you are that which you scientifically try to speak about, which means that you know deep inside of you the questions you ask. You may not be aware of it, but you are unconsciously aware that your body is more than what you see. So this is why when you partake in psychedelic experience, you can metaphorically see and communicate with your genes. And we know that gods tend to represent themselves in dreams or visions, for we have seen this in divine scripture over and over again. Doesn't matter if it's Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Islam, or any kind of religion. And when you think about it and look at spirits, for example, as ideas, it becomes apparent that if you have an idea that is so great that it will tilt the society in a way that only those who have a mutation in their genes will be able to understand it, and therefore they will be the only one able to procreate. They will pass on this gene, and therefore they will pass on the idea, and it will weave itself in biologically into the person. So now you can say that an idea has become alive. And when this gene speaks to you, as it does in dreams or in a psychedelic experience, it manifests itself metaphorically, because it can't manifest itself in another way. Because the only way to speak to your inner self is through your right brain, because it's what lays the ground for your left brain to interpretate. You see, every word, for example, stands on the ground of a right brain interpretation. You say walk, and the image of somebody walking emerges. There have been inventors who have used this kind of knowledge, maybe without knowing that it was that they were using. But for example, the inventor Nikola Tesla was known to write in his journal about a certain kind of collective mind from which he took his ideas from. But that is to say, not a collective mind as in a hive mind, like the ants have, like a connection to which everybody can partake in, a mass summary to everybody to connect. It is more like an archive, like a backpack that is an infinite library that everybody carries on their back. This is why also it takes a long time, and we always see it in ancient cave paintings, because if somebody grows up on the other side of the world, they will have a different kind of archive than somebody else. But certain types of archaic behavior is needed in order to survive in a harsh environment. For example, the need to understand hierarchy, competition, playfulness, negative emotions and positive emotions, to know that when you walk to a cliff, you're not supposed to walk forward. So these will represent themselves in godlike postures. And you can explain, for example, the difference between a demigod and a god, but saying that a demigod is an idea which have infected the mind of the bearer and is able to spread itself to others, but haven't really achieved that biological integration with the body, and therefore it is not immortal. For you see, if you kill the people who have the idea with them dies. But if it's integrated into the gene of the person, and he has been able to spread it to his children, and without them being able to even communicate the idea lives on with them. So they become, in a sense, immortal. This is why the basic interpretation of the most divine being, the God of gods, is the God of all-knowing. That is to say, it is the metaphor for the idea which all humans have within them, the characteristics and behaviors that you can find in any human all over the planet. It is that which is everything. And the only thing we know of, that we know that each and every person have, is consciousness. It is the interpretation of information from your senses that creates you as a being. And now, if you read the Bible, any kind of other religious scripts, with this idea in mind, it becomes more understandable why they would describe the things that they are describing in the way that they are. I would encourage you to reread now all the religious scripts that you have, because most of them implies the same thing. And to say that they are false or that they are not real only means that you have halted, stopped, ceased your capability to evolve as a human being, to see beyond your current perspective.